Three whistles rang out, and I knew what that meant. I was 19 years old, and three whistles on the beach meant someone was missing. I ran down to the main stand, and the captain of our beach shouted the order. They lost someone at field 3. It's a search and rescue. Go. 10 of us ran down the beach to join the search team. There was already a crowd forming. People were pointing to where they last saw the missing swimmer. We dove into the ocean and we swam out past the breaker. We formed a straight line perpendicular to the shore and started our search pattern. We dove down into the cold, dark Atlantic. We swam into the current and we came straight up for air. And when everyone's head popped up, we repeated that process again and again and again and again. We were cold. We were exhausted, but we didn't come in. After more than an hour, I heard those whistles again. It was a terrible feeling. We weren't done. We hadn't found him. We got out, we ran back to our beach, and our captain led us in a moment of silence. And when we opened our eyes, he looked at each of us and he said, "No one goes down in our water. At this field, no one goes down on our watch." And then he said something to me that I will never forget. You either make the save or you die trying. Just a little intense, huh? But we had to get back up and stand that day. We had to do our jobs that day, and the day after that, and the day after that. So our captain said that we needed to learn something from that experience. We had to make some changes, of course, and we had to take better care of ourselves and of each other. We had to have each other's backs. In other words, we had to be resilient. And for 7 summers that I worked at that beach, we had hundreds of thousands of people there. Hundreds of thousands, if you could imagine that, on a Saturday or a Sunday in July. We made hundreds of rescues each day, and we never lost anyone again. No one ever went down on our watch again. What's your definition of resilience? That was the way we defined resilience then. How do you define resilience today? So many of us have been caught off guard. This pandemic, the chaos that ensued, things that are going on politically, racially, there's so much that has disrupted the status quo in our world, in our lives, in our business world. What's your definition? What does resilience look like to you? I want you to take a moment now and write your definition. For so many people believe that resilience is the ability to get back up from setbacks, to bounce back, in other words. And maybe that is what's accurate for you. But what does it look like? What does resilience look like in your world? Is resilience learning from mistakes? Is it the ability to turn adversity into advantage? So many ways to look at what resilience is. In fact, you probably get as many answers as you get from as many people as you ask. Let's look at how McKinsey, who did a bunch of research, really compelling research after the last great recession of 2008. What McKinsey did was they studied resilient organizations and mostly looked at the difference between resilient organizations and less resilient organizations. And of course, the least resilient organizations were wiped out. They didn't survive the 2008 financial crisis. Other organizations that were resilient were able to come back. But the most resilient organizations were the ones that were not only able to come back quickly, but were also able to extend, to be able to create momentum, to be able to surpass where they were previously, and to widen the gap between themselves and their nearest competition. So what you're seeing there is the top line are the most resilient organizations, and then that space in between is the gap between those most resilient organizations and the S&P 500, which, as you know, are about the 500 most successful companies that are tracked. And then the lower line are the least resilient companies. And you can see the gap just keeps getting wider and wider over time. So what that tells us is that resilience isn't just about the moment, isn't just about how you survive, but rather how it is that you create something that lasts into the future, something that can actually help you to thrive in the future. Resilience is all about these three skills. More than anything that I've learned since the time I was 19 years old, and back on the beach when I was 19, we didn't refer to it this way. We looked at it differently, but this is what we were experiencing. The ability to reframe situations, to be able to reset and to regenerate. And so we're going to dive into each of these right now. And then we'll, of course, have time later on for questions. So more importantly than anything else, from a psychological standpoint, from the standpoint of your mental and your emotional resilience, are these three things. That to reframe a situation, first, we have to be able to pause. Everybody take a pause right now. Pause your thinking for just a moment. It's not easy to do. And when we're in fear and when we've got stories playing in our heads, it's even more difficult. And often when we're emotionally caught up in situations, it's that much more difficult to simply pause. So pausing is about shifting into neutral. Just like you're in a car and you put your car into neutral, it allows you to just sit there for a moment without judgment, without figuring out anything, without the pressure. You don't have to see if it's right or wrong, judge it as good or bad, fair or unfair. You're simply neutral. You look at the situation through that neutral lens. And the importance of that is that it allows you then to ask. It allows you to ask questions. You ask questions in order to get answers. In fact, I don't believe you can ever ask a question without getting an answer, because the relationship between those two things is like cause and effect. The only thing I can't say is when you get the answer. I know you'll get an answer. I know I've always gotten an answer to questions that I've asked, but sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it's instantaneous. What kind of questions do you want to ask? It reminds me of something that my grandmother taught me many, many years ago, that we should always be searching for meaning. She used to call the meaning in things the little gems, those little nuggets of wisdom. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's how we're made up. It's how we're built as human beings, that we strive to understand things. We have to make sense of our world. We have to find meaning. So in this process of reframing, we've got to pause so we can get to neutral, so we can remove any judgment for even a moment, so that we can ask in that state of neutrality, what can I learn here? What wisdom can I gain? What understanding is there to be had, so that we can choose? The quality of our lives is so equal to the quality of our decisions, don't you think? The quality of our lives is equal to the quality of the choices that we've made along the way. So in this moment, when many, many people would be paralyzed in fear or reacting from a place of fear, you would be able to choose. If you pause, you ask, and then you are guided from that moment. What are my choices? One essential question is, what creative opportunity can you choose in the moment? And that's the reframing process. Simple, but not necessarily easy. What's the creative opportunity for you right now? We all know that there's been massive disruption, pandemic change in our world. Personally, the business aspects of our lives, the career aspects of our lives, maybe in our finances. What do you do with that right now? Pause, ask, what's the meaning? And search for the creative opportunity so you can choose. You can make a decision to pursue that creative opportunity. What are some of the creative opportunities that you are seeing right now? What are the creative opportunities that are in the marketplace? It could be specific to you or your industry, or it's just a general observation that you are seeing. The creative opportunity. What does that look like right now? I had a podcast earlier today with the CEO of HubSpot, a guy by the name of Brian Halligan. And one of the things that we were talking about as a creative opportunity was this ability to slow down. That often it's counterintuitive. We have to slow down to speed up. We have to take a step backwards in order to take a leap forward. Anybody that's been an entrepreneur for longer than a minute understands that to be true. We can't play it safe. And often what that means is that we've got to be willing to take that step backward to be able to move forward. Employee care, providing health care via telehealth to people in a rural area. Not even just in a rural area. I can tell you that I had a telehealth consultation twice since COVID began. It was absolutely amazing. A general creative opportunity I've seen is teachers coming up with ways to interact with students virtually, different platforms and apps that have been created to help those teachers. This would never have existed only a few months ago. Only 6 months ago, this would have been sort of a pipe dream or something that no one would have thought could ever, in fact, work. This has enabled people to find new skills and help to polish their skills. It's helped us to dig deeper, to go within, to find this time to be able to reset ourselves, to reevaluate our priorities. In business, it's a wonderful time to take a look at your core values to see whether or not the core values that you've espoused are actually relevant in the marketplace right now, given what's going on in our world. Consumers have lost usual sources of goods and services, which opens doors to new businesses. And we are just scratching the surface on the new opportunities that are out there. Many of them because of the digital marketplace, that so many companies have moved to digital. They are distributing so much of their content and so much of their value in digital means. And that's something that has been a long time in the making. And yet this forced the situation. I think it was Thomas Malone that wrote a book called The Future of Work. And he predicted that there'd be this decentralization. There would be this remote working that would be happening. People would work remotely from anywhere in the world, meaning you could work from anywhere and earn from anywhere in the world. And you know what? Thomas Malone was right on, except he wrote that book 20 years ago. And now it's coming to pass. It really is amazing that we're seeing the level of opportunity that's showing up even in the midst of all of this uncertainty. We all know we've got plans. I don't know about you, but usually my plans look like the one on the top, except they almost always look like the one on the bottom when push comes to shove. And I think that's the reality. That's the reality for all of us, that we make our plans and then 6 seconds later, you better be prepared to pivot. I wrote a book called Pivot, The Art and Science of Reinventing Your Career and Life, all about these expected and often unexpected pivots that happen to us. So what do? We've got to reset. So remember, the first step in establishing this resilience, this resilience that gives you that market advantage, that competitive edge. It was our ace in the hole on the beach to be resilient. That's how we were able to have that impeccable record. In this life and death context, we didn't lose anyone again because we were able to reframe the situation that existed. And then we were able to reset. And resetting involves two things. The first of which is to recalculate. And this is really about how we deal with mistakes. Because we all know that when you're in your car and you make a wrong turn, what does your GPS say to you when you're supposed to turn right, but instead you turn left? What does your GPS say to you? It says, you never listen to instructions. It's just like your father said. You cannot listen. Is that what your GPS says to you? No, not mine either. It simply says redirecting, recalculating. Because it knows, it's programmed to know that you can get from where you are to where you want to be. Maybe it's a different route. Maybe it's going to add a few minutes to your time to get to your destination, but you can get there nonetheless. We're the ones that place all this judgment on ourselves when we make mistakes. We could get into that and spend a lot of time on it because it starts when we're in our earliest years of life, in school and at home, that we judge ourselves harshly for making mistakes. And other people, we've experienced the judgment of others when we make mistakes. So the second piece is that we have to recalibrate. We have to make small changes. Just like we said on the beach, we have to make small changes because small change is how we evolve. It's how we grow. In fact, this is the thing that is the toughest part for so many people because they're afraid. They're deathly afraid to make mistakes. And so they opt for what they know. They opt for the devil they know. They opt for the status quo, in other words. And status quo leads to mediocrity, and mediocrity is an epidemic in our world. Status quo does not work. It didn't work on the beach. We went to the beach every single day. The ocean was different. The tides were different. The sweep was different. The rip currents were different. The air, the wind, the sun, the sand, the berm, everything was different. Everything changed. And we had to adapt to that change. We had to be flexible in the face of that change. And if we tried to hold on to it, it was futile. It's the same with us. We can't hold on to things. We have to evolve. We have to allow things to be born and sometimes even to die. We've got to be able to iterate in the face of what is going on in the world. We have to be able to make constant and never-ending pivots, small changes. But the good news is that you don't have to do something drastic. I was a lawyer for 18 years, and I didn't love what I was doing for a lot of that time. But the fortunate thing for me is, and I feel blessed and lucky that I discovered this because no one taught it to me. I didn't learn it in school, and I didn't even learn it from my parents. But I found along the way, my wife and I didn't have to have a midlife crisis when I was unhappy. Instead, I could have a midlife calling by planning it, by taking small steps. And over the course of 2.5 years, I began to change my career path. I began to change my mindset, the way I looked at the world. I made a small change, in other words. And over time, that small change turned into something that we call transformation. It's science. It's not woo-woo. It's not motivation. It's physics, that you cannot change the input in any system and not see the output change as well. You make a small, even a 1%, a 5-degree change in the direction from that straight line that represents status quo. And what you find over time is that those two lines diverge greatly. You find yourself in an entirely different place. But you've got to disrupt that status quo. You've got to be very intentional about self-disrupting and disrupting that status quo, because we know it leads to stagnation. And stagnation always leads to something that is not alive. Water that sits too long becomes toxic. It's the same with us. I spoke about what it would be like to make small changes and how I made small changes on a TEDx stage a few years ago. In fact, I spoke about a real micro change. What I said to myself, in fact, what I said out loud when I woke up in the morning. You think about something we do every day, if we're lucky. No guarantee that we're going to wake up tomorrow, just like there was no guarantee we'd wake up today. It's a blessing when it happens. And I used to wake up in the morning and I put my feet on the floor when I was practicing law, and I would feel anxious in my body. I would feel angst and dread sometimes, and I would even grunt. And I started to change some things, and now I put my feet on the floor, and for the last 12 years, I think of something that I'm grateful for in that moment of waking, and I say 4 simple words out loud. I love my life. I love my life. Even in COVID, no matter what, I love my life. It's a reset. I can reset myself at any point in the day when I get caught. If I get caught in the riptide of fear, doubt, or worry, I put my arms around this buoy, this statement. I'm wearing a shirt that says these words, I am resilient. Something hits me in the middle of the day, I can say that immediately. It's what we call the 10-second reset. What's your 10-second reset? Well, we're going to figure it out together today. We're going to work on it together. What's a statement that you can state out loud right now? An I am statement. I am a great solution creator. I am peaceful, even in the presence of chaos. I am guided in my thinking to the best thoughts. I am loving and kind to everyone that I speak to, everyone that I see, everyone I think of. All we're doing when we're living, when we're alive, is going moment to moment. I know where our minds take us weeks, months, and years ahead. I know that's the way some of us are operating inside, and some of us take us into the past, of course. All we're going is moment to moment. And all you really have responsibility for, in my humble estimation, is to take care of your thinking in this moment. Man, does that take a load of responsibility off your shoulders? But you got to get this moment right. That's the point. So what's that statement that you can say to get this moment right? I am a decent human. I am courageous. I am grateful and blessed. I move with ease and grace. I am someone who does not give up easily. I am getting better at just being me. I am happy. I am strong-willed. I am a survivor. What's that I am statement? Sometimes our first instinct, that first thing that comes to us is the most powerful. I am love. I am loved. I am well. I am healthy. I am wealthy. I am wise. Whatever those statements are, write one of them down. And I want you to practice this. When something kind of takes you out for a second, whatever that thing is that takes you out, I want you to pause. I want you to take a deep breath, get to neutral, and I want you to state whatever that statement is, that 10-second reset for yourself right then and there. When we talk about resilience, we've talked about reframing, we talked about resetting, and now we're going to talk about regenerating. Because the research is very clear about what resilience isn't. So many people think that resilience is really about endurance. How do we endure? How do we endure the pain? How do we just go the extra mile even when we're suffering? And it's perpetuated in so many ways. It's a part of our culture. It's what we see in the media. It's what we see in the movies. It's heroic, and yet it's inaccurate at the same time. Resilience is not about endurance. Resilience is actually about recovery. Harvard Business Review studied the highest performing athletes, looked at the people who perform the best in the world in the athletic arena, Olympians, professional athletes, and they compared those high performing athletes with executives, the highest performing executives. They found that they had one thing in common. If you know what that one thing is that they had in common, go ahead and type it in the chat really quick, because I'm going to say it in about 10 seconds. They had one thing in common. It's written right there. Rituals. That's the answer. Rituals. But what kind of rituals? Rituals for recovery. I see it right there. Luke, you got it? Rituals for their mental, their emotional, their physical, and their spiritual recovery. Because it turns out that resilience is actually holistic. It's four things, not just one. It's not the Rocky model. I mean, we know, right? Rocky gets knocked down and knocked down and knocked down again and again and again. He keeps getting up. He wins our hearts, but he loses the fight. And you got to be around at the end of the race to win the race. And what we found that to be around requires that you create, that you are able to cultivate, that you're even able to learn how to become more resilient mentally. In your mind, more resilience emotionally in your feelings, more resilience in your physicality, and even spiritually. Resilience is holistic. Now, a number of you already filled out the resilience assessment. It takes about 3 minutes. We created a special link just for everybody that's associated with MOVEE, and it's movie.resilienceculture.com. And if you haven't yet done the assessment, go ahead and write that down. You can do it anytime you like. It's entirely free, and it's a resource to you. What will happen is that you will get a raw score. You will find out where you are in those 4 areas, and most importantly, what can you do to improve your score? Right now, we've got quite a number of people that took the assessment. In fact, the raw score overall is 64. Maybe some of you are still in school and some of you have been out of school for a while, but we already know that on a scale of 1 to 100, a 64 needs some improvement. And this is a sample size of 50 people. 50 people have already taken this assessment from your organizations, and this is the raw score. So let's break it down a little bit. In those 4 quadrants, we're looking at some scores that were pretty good and some scores that were really missing the mark. You can look at question 12 and 13, and those scores are in the green, and those were really quite good. As a comparison, not to the object of getting near to 100, but in comparison to other organizations that we've studied. And we have worked with, taken these assessments from hundreds of other organizations, thousands of people in total. So these scores were above average. The red indicates being below the median score that we would associate with those other organizations. So what do we see here? That many of you are working well into the evenings, well into the weekends. In fact, what is a weekend these days, right? It's kind of a laughable thing because the week doesn't end. Not getting enough sleep comes up. being attached to your phone, what we call constant cognitive arousal, the fact that many people are touching their phones, looking at their phones 150 to 200 times a day. They go to sleep with their phones. They wake up with their phones, and it's interfering with their rest, their ability to rest their mind, their ability to actually get into deeper REM states of sleep, to get deeper, more regenerative sleep. And here's an interesting one as well. So it says here, I'm engaged in a livelihood that's in line with my values and my beliefs. So you guys are scoring really, really high there. That's really great. And also it's scoring that you believe in your own talents and solutions. So that's fantastic as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as an executive. Those are really fundamentally important things. And yet when we look at the score for 14 and 15, what we see is that there's a significant gap between what people are saying is important to them, their highest values, and how they actually spend their time and their energy. And that's something that deserves to be looked at. That's something to dive deeper into, to sit with, including 15 that says that many of you don't feel that you're making a big enough difference in the world. What can be done about that? As my wife would say, what's the creative opportunity in that awareness, in that realization? There are places where significant gaps have existed between the scores that we've already got from 50 people and those that we've gotten from companies and organizations and individuals across the globe. Number 4, I overcome setbacks or difficult situations quickly. Even though that score is relatively high, it's in the yellow, not in the green, but not in the red. It's still lower than in many instances with many people. So that's something to look at. Again, we've already covered the fact that often there are emotional challenges that come up. And what we're seeing here in question 10 and 11 is that often people are not feeling in control and are not feeling as though their response is healthy, and maybe even leading toward victimhood in the explanation of what's going on. So these are all things that deserve looking at. And what's really important is that when you take the assessment, you'll get your results. You'll also get what is the equivalent of a white paper as far as I'm concerned. It's just filled with research and suggestions, recommendations, best practices for how it is that you make small changes. You make corrections to where it is that you're at. And when we're talking about how it is that we make these changes, we're talking about rituals for recovery. Rituals in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. How it is that you start your day. I've already shared with you, my waking ritual is to put my feet on the floor, feel grateful, and to say those 4 words out loud, I love my life. But I have other rituals as well, like starting the day with something healthy in my body, to be able to eat slowly, to put love into my food, sometimes to sit in stillness. I declare it out loud. I'm a crappy meditator, and I'm probably not a good meditator to this day, but I believe in stillness, to be able to quiet your mind, maybe even to pray. In the afternoon, are you drinking enough water? Most people are not. Are you eating healthy snacks that are not depleting to you the way coffee and sugar is in the afternoon? Those kinds of things that we lean on, that we go to, often what they do is they put us back in cortisol overload. We are walking around in sort of low-level anxiety all the time, and reaching for that sugar or reaching for that coffee only triggers those same responses in us. Whereas you can take 20 minutes and put your feet up the wall and close your eyes and put something over your eyes, and 20 minutes later you can feel as though you had a 2 or 3 hour nap. I did that earlier today. I had a very, very active day before this, and I have so much energy, in part because I took that 25 minutes earlier to simply unplug, put my feet up the wall, put something over my eyes, and rest my mind, rest my heart, rest my legs, allow the blood to flow differently, take the pressure off your legs and off your lower back. What are you doing in the evening to decompress? Are you walking? 20, 30 minutes of walking has been proven over and over again to be one of the healthiest things we can do for our hearts, for our heads, for everything. When are you unplugging? When are you going to bed? What are your rituals, in other words? Now, again, you might think that this is going to require major changes. In fact, it reminds me of this guy. If you know the person's name, the name of the person you're seeing on screen right now, and I'll give you a hint. He was the fitness director for the British national cycling team starting around 1998. Anybody know who he is before you go ahead and Google it? His name is Dave Brailsford. And what Dave inherited with the British cycling team was something pretty interesting. They had never, ever won a Tour de France. The cycling team from Great Britain never won a Tour de France. months. They hadn't won a gold medal in the Olympics since 1908. Basically, the technical term for this was they sucked. And they clearly had to make some very big changes. Yes? No, that was not Dave Brailsford's approach. He came in and his theory was that all we really needed to do, all they needed to do, was to look at all the areas they could improve, even just 1%. 1% progress was all he was after, but in 1,000 different areas. Areas like the box truck that took the bikes to the event, he decided to paint the inside of that box truck white instead of it being brown or black or gray. Why did he do that? Because what he found was that when the truck was white, you could see the dirt. You couldn't see the dirt when the truck was dark, when the floor was dark. And why did that matter? Because it was those fibers, that dirt that would get in the gears of the bikes and would erode the performance of those high-tech bikes. 1% change, 1% progress over perfection was Dave Brailsford's call to action. And within a few short years, they had gotten to the Olympics, I think in 2008. They had won more medals in the Olympics than any other team. And now by count, I think they've got 5 or 6 Tour de France victories as well. So what are the 1% changes that you can make right now? Not the big, massive changes like I'm going to move to Fiji, even though right now you could probably move to Fiji and work pretty well from there. But what are the small changes, the micro changes that you can make in these areas? Remember, resilience is holistic. It's mental, it's emotional, it's physical, and it's spiritual. What are some of those 1% changes? What are some small things that you could do to help yourself be more resilient? Maybe you're going to use that model that you're going to pause and you're going to ask and you're going to choose when you're caught up in something that's emotional, when you're caught up in feeling bad about what's going on in your life. Maybe that's the method. Or you're going to drink more water, go to bed earlier and exercising for at least 1 hour per day. Start going for walks in the evening, yoga, stretching. What else can we do? What's that 1% change? When it comes to spiritual, by the way, I don't mean religious. I mean that often there's a disconnect between the things we say are important in our lives. Like for me, when I was a lawyer, there was nothing more important to me than my family. To this day, nothing more important to me than my children and my wife. And yet I was a lawyer and I was a workaholic, and I would say every night to my wife, I'm going to be home for dinner. And I lied. I didn't lie when I said it because I meant it. I intended it, but I would lie because it wasn't as important to me to figure out how to organize my day well enough that I could get everything I needed to get done and still be home for work. And so I had a disconnect inside of me. I felt miserable. I remember coming home one night really late. I'd missed not only dinner with the family, but missed the kids going to bed. And it was rainy and cold. And I walked in the house and I looked at my wife and I saw the look on her face and I immediately knew it. I knew I had done it again. And I walked up to her and I said, if I keep doing what I'm doing, you're going to be a widow, because I was disconnected. And when we talk about spiritual resilience, we're talking about being connected, being congruent. The things that are important to you are actually the things that you spend your time and your effort doing. And sometimes that means reorganizing your priorities. I'm not great to this day at time management, but I'm great at priority management. I don't handle my schedule anymore. I haven't handled my schedule in years because I'm not good at it. I'm supported in that place. So where is it that you could ask for support? That's a 1% change, just to ask someone for some support, even if that support is accountability for those changes that you want to make. I'm going to share something with you that really changed my life. Going back a number of years ago, I knew that I wanted to make some significant changes to how I felt about my life and how I felt during the day. And I still believe now that at the end of our days, what we will have is a feeling. We will be there as we all get there, whenever that time is, and we will feel something. And I want to feel that my life felt good consistently, that I want to be the conscious creator of my own life experience. But how do you do that? Well, you do that in one way by using a code of conduct. And what you're seeing there is a picture of the code of conduct that I created for myself about 12 years ago. I wanted to create some statements that reminded me at the beginning of the day how I wanted to experience life for that day. It's kind of a cross between Ben Franklin's practice, who had a practice about looking at how he wanted to experience himself. He didn't use those terms, but it's a cross between that and A Course in Miracles, I guess. How do you create the day the perfect day in your life? Well, to me, you reverse engineer the process and you decide at the outset of the day how you want to experience yourself feeling for that day. Do you want to feel wealthy? Because I know some people that have a lot of money in the bank who don't feel wealthy. In fact, they feel scared, or more money doesn't alleviate that feeling. It doesn't give them the feeling of being wealthy. And yet I know other people that don't have a lot of money, but feel very wealthy. And they feel rich because they spend their time the way they want to spend their time, with people they want to spend their time with. And they don't worry necessarily, or they're not anxious about money. And they are rich. They feel rich. What's it like to feel healthy? What's it like to feel peaceful? What's it like to feel like you are the eye of the storm, that you won't be toppled over when the winds blow hard? What's it feel like to feel that you can trust yourself in any circumstance in times of great change like we're living in right now? What does that look like for you? Well, it starts with a code, not my code, your code. So the exercise that you're going to have right now is to take a swipe at filling out your first code of conduct, at least something that you can look at tomorrow morning and say, how do I want to experience today? How do I want to experience this brand new day? And so the simple way that you do that is by filling out these statements. And you can do it right now. I experience blank today. What? What do you experience today? I always start mine with the same one. So you're going to do that right now. I experience something today. And I'll put mine up again so you can see them. But I always start with, I experience gratitude today. I experience having a positive and harmonious attitude today. I experience living in absolute integrity and kindness today. We've got some life work for you. First of all, I want you to continue to expand on what you just started. I started with 13. You don't have to have 13. You could start with 1. You could start with 10, whatever you like. Typically, the way that process works for me is I wake up and I'll get some quiet time very, very early in my day. I won't be looking at the phone. I won't be doing too much. I'll sit quietly and I'll take out that piece of paper and I'll look at it, what I wrote down. I experience gratitude today. And I'll sit with that gratitude feeling for a moment, and then I'll move on. And that whole process can take 5 minutes. It can take 15. It can lead into meditation. It can lead into prayer or stillness, anything you like. It can be short or it could be longer. And the beauty of it is that at the end of the day, you don't have to trust me that this works. The best authority on whether this works is going to be you. You start in the morning, you state those experiences, and then you check in at night before you go to bed and just see the way Ben Franklin did this. A little different, but check off the box. I experienced that today. He had wanted to be of high moral character, and he had these values that he wanted to make sure that he was living. And he would check in. Did I live that value today? And if he didn't, he knew where to put his attention. He knew where he needed to improve. And it's the same for me. When I check in at night and I look at these experiences and I think to myself, I experienced 90% of those today. Sometimes it's 100%. And where there's something that I didn't experience, I get to ask myself, why is that so? What could I have changed? Because ultimately you want to be able to create your own recovery map. And what you see on the screen right in front of you is this life work assignment. I never liked homework. I didn't like it back in school, and I don't like it to this day. So our team calls it life work. And your life work is to see what 1% changes you can commit to. Creating your own recovery map mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. 1%, not a major change, but one thing that you can do to increase your resilience in those 4 different areas, in those 4 areas that are so important to us in being holistically resilient. And resilience, again, is how we reframe. Remember, it's those 3 things. We've got to pause, we've got to ask, and then we get to choose the creative opportunity. We reset. Resetting is about recalculating and recalibrating. And regenerating is all about our rituals for recovery. It's that simple. If you do those things, you will be more resilient. Again, if you haven't yet, please feel free to go ahead and take the assessment, movie.resilienceculture.com. It's a simple way for you to find out where you currently are, and then you'll get our Resilience Kickstart Kit that goes along with that to helping you to make those improvements. On the beach, we were resilient, and part of what we were resilient, why we were resilient, is that we had a resilient attitude. So attitude is so important, and I love this quote by Chuck Swindoll, and I'll read it out loud because it's one of those things that I'd love for you to take a picture of it. Let's read this together. You guys can read it out loud where you are as well. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It's more important than circumstances, than failure, than successes, than what other people think or say or do. It is more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, a home. The remarkable thing is that we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past, cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing that we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes.